The light in your eyes comes over me just like a sunrise. You set a scene, turning my gray skies blue, just like you always do. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. My mind is made up, won't ever change. And no matter what, I feel the same. Hold up the world for you whenever you want me to. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. I don't want anyone else, anyone else. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. I don't want anyone else but you.
Let's go dancing in the city lights, city lights. Ain't it ready? Gonna be no better time. We're feeling high and you know we got a good flow. And there ain't no one gonna tell us no, tell us no. No, 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 let's go. No hesitating. We gotta move, we gotta shake, we gotta get up on our feet and liberated. You feel like something's out of control. Your mind says yes and your body says oh. Let's go, oh, oh, oh. Let's go, let's go. The sky is lit and it's gonna be a good night. What's mine is yours if it makes you feel alright. I wanna dance, I can feel it in my bones now. Feel the pull, oh, come on, let your body flow. So, let's go. No hesitating. We gotta move, we gotta shake, we gotta get up on our feet and liberated. You feel like something's out of control. Your mind says yes and your body says oh. Let's go, oh, oh. Let's go, let's go. Let's go. No hesitating. Something's out of control. Your mind says yes and your body says oh. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Have I gotten your attention? I surrender everything. Like a shadow in the dark you cannot see. I remember every summer how I fell in love again. All the nights turn into dreams I won't forget. I wanna leave it at the door, 'cause I don't wanna feel anymore. I should have said something before, but I don't wanna feel anymore. I wanna be alive. I wanna be alive. Here in the moment, here in the sun, there's only a light. I wanna be alive. I wanna be alive. Here in the darkness, under the stars, there's only a light. I can see in my reflection, now you're staring back at me. I was only using half my memory. I collect your observations, I will store them separately. I have counted every word you've said to me. I wanna leave it at the door, but I don't wanna feel anymore. I should have said something before, but I don't wanna feel anymore. I wanna be alive. I wanna be alive. Here in the moment, here in the sun, there's only a light. I wanna be alive. I wanna be alive. Here in the darkness, under the stars, there's only a light. Me on the ground, me on the ground, there was me on the ground, me on the ground, there was me on the ground, me on the ground, there was me on the ground. I wanna be alive. I wanna be alive. Here in the moment, here in the sun, there's only a light. I wanna be alive. I wanna be alive. Here in the darkness, under the stars, there's only a light.
Take
when we're through. We'll get there together, we'll get there together. I'll meet you at the starting line. Don't you ever leave my side. We'll get there together, we'll get there together. If it takes all day or night, hand in hand we'll both arrive. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh. You wanna see the sunrise, starry nights and endless seas. Writing our own story, let's go and make this what it's meant to be. Let's scream it out, let's go and make this what it's meant to be. We'll get there together, we'll get there together. I'll meet you at the starting line. Don't you ever leave my side. We'll get there together, we'll get there together. If it takes all day or night, hand in hand we'll both arrive. Do you feel your heartbeat? Do you feel the warmth beneath your feet? 'Cause you're standing next to me. Do you feel your heartbeat? Do you feel the warmth beneath your feet? 'Cause you're standing next to me. Yeah. 'Cause you're standing next to me. Oh, we'll get there together, we'll get there together. I'll meet you at the starting line. Don't you ever leave my side. We'll get there together, we'll get there together. If it takes all day or night, hand in hand we'll both arrive. Yeah, hand in hand we'll both arrive. Hand in hand we'll both arrive.
Just like you used to. Just like you used to. Not gonna fight it, not gonna hide it, not gonna try to reinvent the wheel. It's just my eyesight, just my blind eyes. Just can't imagine what you must feel. When I do what I say, it all goes away when you turn your face looking for something real. Everything must go, everything must go. I'm having a liquidation sale. 'Cause it's all been done, 'cause it's all been done, 'cause it's all been done, 'cause it's all been done. In the blink of an eye, everything's gonna be just fine. Gonna be just fine. I know it, know it. Hey, it's a pivotal time for the world to turn around. The world to turn around, just like we used to. Sun on the pavement, new arrangement of what we used to be. Flowers in the dust, broken trust, mind over matter, just to be free. 'Cause it's all been done, yeah, it's all been done. 'Cause it's all been done, yeah, it's all been done. In the blink of an eye, everything's gonna be just fine. Gonna be just fine. I know it, know it. Hey, it's a pivotal time for the world to turn around. A world to turn around. because they're watching, just because they're listening.
Just like we used to.
Just because they're watching, just because they're listening.
I could stay forever here in the moonlight, 'cause this feels just right. Oh, you know you got me. And we can watch the sunrise and welcome a new day. Oh, if you just stay here, you know you got me. Oh, this is the start of something beautiful. And oh, this is the start of something you should know. Oh, you got me. Oh, you got me. Whoa. Oh, you got me. Oh, you got me. Whoa. This is like a movie, the whole world can watch us. They'll be in awe of just how much you got me. There might be some hard days, life might get crazy. Oh, it can try, but it will never stop me. Oh, this is the start of something beautiful. And oh, this is the start of something you should know. Oh, you got light in your eyes comes over me just like a sunrise. You set a scene, turning my gray skies blue, just like you always do. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. My mind is made up, won't ever change. And no matter what, I'll feel the same. Hold up the world for you whenever you want me to. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. I don't want anyone else, anyone else. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. I don't want anyone else, 'cause I know there's not anyone else that makes me feel the way you do. It's easy to prove I don't want anyone else but you. I don't want anyone else but you.
Let's go dancing in the city lights, city lights. Paint it red, gonna be no better time. We're feeling high and you know we got a good flow. And there ain't no one gonna tell us no, tell us no. No, 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 let's go. No hesitating. We gotta move, we gotta shake, we gotta get up on our feet and liberate it. Feel like something's out of control. Your mind says yes and your body says.
It's the moments before a wave forms that matter the most. It's then, in the groundswell, that things start to happen. The water level rises with expectancy, slowly building, breaking, and then with a crash, changes the landscape forever. It's not the wave that starts change. It's the groundswell. A group of women who knew that they would be more disappointed by the things they didn't do than by the things they did, gathered in a living room to ask themselves how they could be the force of progress and positive change in their community. Together, they found common ground in the American values and ethics in which they each believed. So they formed WAVE, Women for American Values and Ethics, then got to doing. First as a small group, then larger and larger, That group of 21 women in a living room is now 1,000 women strong, and they are out there doing the work of change. Change takes the dedication to knock on doors, to organize, to register voters, and to speak for those with marginalized voices. The first steps toward change take courage and then perseverance, because the meaningful work that leads to progress happens one step at a time. Change takes women across generations coming together to rise with the expectancy of a better community. And as we know, these women helped to build a wave that would change the landscape forever. WAVE is beginning the next phase of change. The women of WAVE have developed new ways to impact their communities and others, to engage, educate, and empower even more women to rise for their values and ethics. It's our collective American values and ethics that will carry us to tomorrow, next year, and the next era.
Welcome to WAVE Action Fund's 2021 event, Light the Way for Change. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are excited to be broadcasting this presentation across the globe to viewers at home and to those who have gathered in socially distanced events in homes throughout Orange County. WAVE's vision is a thriving and inclusive democracy. Our programs encourage citizen advocates to bring about change through local initiatives and partner programs. While we have an exciting program to share with you, tonight is also a fundraiser. Your funds will support the work of WAVE Action Fund, our 501c4 nonprofit, and will allow us to continue and grow our humanitarian, environmental, civic, and social justice work. We are an all-volunteer organization, so your dollars are stretched as far as possible. We have given out dozens of student scholarships for this program so that our next generation of leaders can hope, be inspired, and take action to light the way for change. Thank you for your donations and ticket sales, which made tonight possible. We are deeply grateful to our many corporate and individual sponsors, especially our luminary sponsors, South Coast Plaza, Rita and Howard Kahn, Bonnie and David Eastman, and Arlene and Jim Joyce. Many thanks to our Trailblazer, Beacon, Sunbeam, and Ray of Light sponsors as well. Their names are on the screen now. Tonight, we will celebrate 4 community activists who are guiding lights in our community. We will also hear from 3 nationally renowned figures on extremism, domestic terrorism, and social media, Dr. Pete Simi, Ms. Megan Phelps-Roper, and Dr. Megan Squire. We will also have the opportunity to learn from a community partner organization, Braver Angels, about how we can work to depolarize our nation. And don't worry, you'll have plenty of opportunities to donate. Please visit our website at www.wave4all.org, click on the link below, or text the word WAVE to 56512 to donate at any time during the program. Our goal is $100,000, and we are more than halfway there. Thank you in advance for your generosity. And now I have the pleasure of introducing one of the coolest and most accomplished women in Orange County, Dr. Alethea Monge, WAVE's Vice President. After growing up in the Philippines, Dr. Monge earned her master's degree in environmental management at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. After working at World Bank, she earned her doctorate at the University of Southern California in Planning and Development Studies. Upon graduating, Dr. Monge joined the Milken Institute and served as adjunct professor at UCI teaching sustainable planning. I'm so proud to work alongside this brilliant woman through our shared passion for WAVE. My friend, Dr. Ali Monge.
We begin tonight by honoring 4 extraordinary individuals who, in these dark times of COVID, have found a way to be guiding lights for those in our underserved communities through their commitment to service and social justice.
For there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Annie Delladonna holds the distinction of being nicknamed a bulldog in heels because of her bravery and aggressive advocacy for social justice. She's a clinical law professor at UCI and a private practice attorney. She was awarded the UCI Pro Bono Award for her tireless work with students on a clemency project for the innocence appeal case of Juan Rayford and Dupree Glass.
I'm Annie Delladonna. I'm Juan Rayford and Dupree Glass's attorney. Juan and Dupree were sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences for allegedly shooting at a house where 11 people lived. No one was injured. They've been in prison for 15 years. We're hoping to get justice for these two young men. They are actually innocent. They were not shooters that night. They did not have guns. These young teenagers, who are now 32 and 33, deserve justice. They deserve to get out. Last month in the California Supreme Court, we won a huge ruling. In that case, the Supreme Court said, pretty much, we're abolishing the kill zone theory. And that's a theory that was used to prosecute Juan and Dupree. In that theory, all the prosecutor had to do was draw a big circle around an area and say everyone in this circle should get an attempted murder charge as a victim to the shooting. The prosecutor doesn't have to prove specific intent. The prosecutor doesn't have to prove that the shooter intended to kill anyone within that circle. Well, the Supreme Court agreed with us. They agreed that that law is ambiguous, it's wrong, and we know now, after doing an analysis of the existing cases under that law, that 84% of the people prosecuted under that law are minorities.
They've been waiting 16 long years for this moment.
It's just a great feeling to be free and actually have your name clean. You own your own name again. You're not just a number no more. So it's pretty good. It's a pretty good feeling.
Juan Rayford and Dupree Glass reunited with their families. Their loved ones getting some hope last month when the convictions in the case that centered mostly on witness statements and involved no physical evidence were vacated by an appellate court. Today, the men walked out of Superior Court with their attorney. The rest of their lives still ahead.
I'm fourth generation, half Chinese, half Japanese, and I grew up in a rural area in Northern California where there's a lot of farm workers. While being here in Orange County, one of the things I saw was there wasn't a lot of support for Asian and Pacific Islander organizations, and that's when we started Okapica. I think what makes me the proudest is that the diversity of over 60 different Asian and Pacific Islander ethnic groups coming together to work on common goals, and to also work with all other communities. So Asian and Pacific Islander, Latino communities coming together around voter empowerment and voter mobilization. That's been really exciting for me. When I got my present, my mom was watching me, and I opened the box all excited thinking it's a Barbie. I wanted a Barbie, and I wanted to be like Barbie. And it was books. And I was just like, oh God, I got books. And my mom was telling me, I want you to look at those books. And when I looked at the books, it was the children's series on civil rights. It was Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, it was Frederick Douglass. And I was looking at my mom, wondering, why would you buy these for me? And she told me, Marianne, when I was 9 years old, I had been taken from my home and interned in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. I lost my rights. I want you to remember that, because I don't want you to grow up wanting to be Barbie. I want you to grow up and want to change the world. I want you to grow up and think about Rosa Parks and Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King Jr. I want you to think about how to change the world being a leader like that. And because of her, that's why I went into the work that I do. In 2020, nearly 4,000 hate incidences and hate crimes were reported against Asians in this nation. And 46% of those were reported in California. And so at Okapica, we've been doing a lot of work to educate the community about what a hate incident is or what a hate crime is, how to report, that there's a great resource, stopaapihate.org, that has the information in language that people can report. And at Okapica and all of our partner organizations, we're working together to make sure that all community members know their rights, their resources, and where to get help. And so just really appreciate all of the community members who are allies, who are helping us with a Stop Asian Hate campaign, and really concerned about racial justice in this time.
The OC Justice Project was initially founded right here at University High School in Irvine, California. Our mission is simple. We aim to inspire our generation to care about the issues that are undermining the democratic ideals our justice system was intended to be founded upon. Our vision is to empower youth to drive actionable change in their communities by engaging in political outreach efforts and raising awareness about racial discrimination in our justice system.
It is the most rewarding thing you can do in life. That exchange that we have with our friends out here, there's a moment of relief when somebody gets their skin washed, when they get a Band-Aid, when they get wrapped. That's a moment that is indescribable. Morning, my friend. We've got Gatorade, snacks, sandwiches. For you and I, if we get a nick or a scrape, we get to wash that. But if you live outside and that's where you call home, that nick and scrape will turn into something that no one should have to go through. We can all agree that wounds need to heal. If you're walking down the street and you see something on the ground, you should pick that up. If you're walking along and you see a human down, you should stop. You should tend. This problem isn't going away unless we step up and we do something. It's not up to somebody else, it's up to us.
WAVE has succeeded in Orange County through the countless number of grassroots activists who have volunteered their time to advocate for marginalized voices in our community. When families were being torn apart by ICE, WAVE developed an immigration legal clinic for undocumented parents. When laws protecting our environment were under attack, we formed a coalition to lobby city councils to adopt community choice energy. There are 6 WAVE working action groups: environment, government integrity, gun safety, migrant rights, social justice, and voter mobilization. These programs encourage citizen advocates to bring about positive change through community activism and partnerships. You can read more about our work in our newly released Impact Report 2021. A link to the full report will be in your inboxes after the event. And now, we want to show you the work of WAVE that is lighting the way for change. Enjoy.
Good evening. Firearms are now the #1 leading cause of death for American children and teens. Our schools now have active shooter drills. My 6th grader still talks about a time 2 years ago when her elementary school went into lockdown. Kids had to hide in their dark classrooms wondering if there was a shooter in the school. Our children deserve better than that, and parents need to know their kids are safe when we take them to school. We have focused on closing the gun shows at the OC Fairground. Unregulated ghost guns and military-style weapons flow out of these shows and into our communities. Ghost guns are untraceable, they don't require waiting periods or background checks, and they are increasingly linked to violent crimes. Our Gun Safety Working Action Group works to raise community awareness around these issues. We educate about gun violence restraining orders, which are red flag laws that allow police to temporarily remove guns from someone who is a threat to themselves or others. We've found, though, that too many people are not aware of these laws, and a lot of Orange County Police has not had enforcement training. Your support of our program will allow us to continue our community outreach and coordinate education and training with law enforcement across the county. The gun violence epidemic impacts all of us. We all have a stake in this. We continue to work on it culturally, electorally, and legislatively, but there's so much work to do. Thank you for support of our program.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Kathleen Treseder, Chair of the Environmental Working Action Group at WAVE. Our mission is to convince every city in Orange County to adopt 100% renewable energy. We've been very successful so far, and Irvine, Fullerton, Huntington Beach, and Buena Park have all founded a community choice energy program, which will allow them to offer 100% renewable energy to all residents and businesses within these cities starting next year. We're not stopping there, though. We want every city in Orange County to join. We are partnering with Climate Action Campaign, a nonprofit whose staff members are directly contacting city council members in each of these cities. We need this help desperately. This is where you come in. Your donations will help us direct those funds to Climate Action Campaign to offset the salaries of these staff members. Basically, your help will bring 100% renewable energy to Orange County and move the needle on climate change. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I want to talk to you about WAVE's work on voter engagement. WAVE has registered thousands of students to vote in the county, and we have trained many of them for leadership roles so they can teach their peers about the importance of democracy and increased voter turnout. Our student-centered approach has served as a model for the work being done on student voter registration in different parts of the country. In addition, WAVE was a key partner of the Big Send campaign, a nationwide effort to get out the vote in the 2020 election and the Georgia runoff. We all know how important those elections were. While we were one of the smallest partners in the campaign, our volunteers wrote the largest number of letters per capita. I was not surprised. Many of you here tonight have spent thousands of hours supporting our work. However, another key part of our work is the capacity to fund it. Letters were written without concern for the cost because members knew that WAVE would be able to cover their stamps. We purchased more than 8,000 stamps for our members, and we know we had an impact. So we thank you for your support, and we ask you to please keep your generosity going as we prepare for the 2022 election. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Allie and our Working Action Group leaders for those compelling remarks highlighting their transformative work in our community. We encourage you to use the donate button on the screen now or text the word WAVE to 56512 to fund our grassroots movement to bring sustainable energy, gun safety, and voter education, among other benefits, to Orange County. I am now honored to introduce Dr. Pete Simi. Dr. Simi is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at Chapman University. He has studied extremism and violence for more than 20 years, conducting interviews and observation with a range of violent gangs and political extremists. He is a member of InSight, funded by the Department of Homeland Security and committed to the scientific study of the causes and consequences of terrorism in the United States and around the world. His research has been featured in media outlets such as the Rolling Stone magazine, New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. He has appeared on various television broadcasts, including Good Morning America, Larry King Now, and CNN's AC360. He is currently serving as one of the plaintiff's experts in the landmark civil case aimed at holding the organizers of the 2017 Unite the Right rally accountable for the violence they helped incite and commit in Charlottesville, Virginia. In an article entitled "The Secret Life of the Professor Who Lives with Nazis," his work is described. Quote, "Few researchers have dared to venture as deeply into white power organizations as Simi, now a professor at Chapman University in Orange County. He has spent the last 20 years studying their motivations, lifestyles, psychology, and behavior. He is embedded with hate groups, getting to know the secret worlds of the White Aryan Resistance, Nazi lowriders, and Public Enemy No. 1, and in recent years, newer, younger groups that use social media to recruit, such as RAM, the Rise Above movement, which this year had 4 of its neo-Nazi members charged with FBI in connection with violence at rallies, including in Charlottesville in 2017. Dr. Simi has conducted up-close ethnographic research on white supremacists, studying their culture and worldview by interacting with them. He monitors online platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for hate speech and extremist dogma. In 2019, WAVE was honored to have Dr. Simi interview Derek Black at our inaugural Light the Way for Change event. In 2019, with the rise of hate crimes in Orange County and nationally, we at we at WAVE felt an urgent need and responsibility to begin a community conversation that would lead us on a path towards mutual respect and dignity for all. Dr. Simi, we are incredibly grateful to have you back for our 2021 event. And unfortunately, I believe we have seen a rise in hate crimes and extremism since we first began this conversation with you in 2019. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be part of the event.
We're so glad to have you. Thanks for being back with us.
You bet. Yeah, I mean, we've seen, we saw the initial increase in hate crimes in the 2016, 2017, and those trends have continued more recently. And of course, we saw what happened, what unfolded in our nation's capital on January 6th with the attempted insurrection. We've seen a number of high-profile terror attacks in terms of shooting rampages, El Paso, Pittsburgh, and a number of others. And so, we're in really very much the midst of this kind of ongoing resurgence of white supremacist extremism, so much so that, even the Department of Homeland Security and FBI are now, citing this type of threat as the most serious, most lethal threat to domestic security.
Right. And can you tell us about what we have seen that rise of not just hate speech, but actually in that political extremism that maybe most showed itself in the siege on the Capitol. Can you tell us what's troubling you the most regarding the extremism in our country?
Well, a number of things. Certainly the violence and the threat that poses is at the top of the list, but also the mainstreaming of this type of hate and extremism, I think, is very troubling. So much so that, we saw the emergence of this QAnon movement, which is based on a host of different conspiracy theories. The idea that there's a conspiracy of sex traffickers, primarily led by Democratic elites who are literally sucking the blood of children. And this gained literally millions of adherents, people buying into various aspects of the conspiracy theories that were being promoted under this general banner of QAnon. And even we have congressional members, who are literally serving in Congress who are adherents of QAnon or have been certainly adherents of QAnon. So, and that's just one example of where we see this kind of mainstreaming of this kind of hate and extremism. It's, I think, also very troubling along with the violence.
Well, we've highlighted the problems that we're having right now. Could you maybe give us a glimmer of hope, or what gives you hope regarding this area? Is there something that you can share with us that are we coming out of this darker time perhaps? Is there any good news?
Well, I do think there is. I mean, I think we're in the midst of a struggle, and we have to recognize it as such. And as a struggle, there needs to be proactive efforts. And we do see proactive efforts taking place across the country. This event is a good example. In the state of California, there's now been passed for at least 11th and 12th graders as an elective, ethnic studies education. I think that's an important step in the right direction. Of course, we want to see that hopefully required at some point and also extended to earlier grade levels, because 11th and 12th grade, in my view, is way too late to wait to provide a more kind of diverse type of curriculum and education. And so I think we do have some steps in the right direction, but we really need to recognize the challenges that we're up against. And we need to think back, I think, historically and learn from previous historical eras. So, for instance, the Reconstruction era, I think, has a lot to teach us. And that was a window of an opportunity that we lost, unfortunately. And so we want to make sure that the window of an opportunity we have today isn't lost. And so we need to be very intentional about these kind of proactive efforts that we engage in.
And I'm going to now introduce our next speaker and bring her into this conversation. She, I think, is a great example of when you say trying to find those people, and the impact of perhaps ethnic studies is she was radicalized as a child. Author, speaker, and activist Megan Phelps Roper was raised in the Westboro Baptist Church, the Topeka, Kansas church, known internationally for its daily public protests against members of the LGBTQ community, Jews and Christians, the military, and countless others. She participated in picketing almost daily and spearheaded the use of social media in the church. Dialogue with quote unquote enemies online proved instrumental to her de-radicalization, and she left the church and her entire way of life in November 2012. Since then, she's become an advocate for people and ideas that she was taught to despise, especially the value of empathy and dialogue with people across ideological lines. Ms. Phelps-Roper's life story exposes the dangers of black and white thinking and the need for true humility in a time of angry polarization. She's appeared in various media formats to promote her new values and beliefs. In January 2017, she presented a TED Talk discussing her experiences growing up within the church and her journey towards her decision to leave. Chris Anderson, head of TED, said of Ms. Phelps-Roper, "From her story, we can learn things sorely needed in our age: empathy, openness, and how we can best build bridges across divided lines." Ms. Phelps-Roper is a member of Twitter's Trust and Safety Council and works with law enforcement agencies to give her perspective on de-radicalizing members of extremist organizations and on counterterrorism. In 2019, she released a memoir, Unfollow, A Journey from Hatred to Hope. I'm so pleased to bring Ms. Phelps-Roper into this conversation with Dr. Simi.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so happy to have you.
Thanks for joining us, Megan. Much appreciated.
So good to see you again, Pete.
Yeah, likewise. And I want to get to how we met, but first I'd like to start with your family. And I think it's important to recognize you didn't choose to be born into the family. None of us choose to be born into the family that we're born into. But that doesn't mean we don't love our families any less, no matter what the circumstances are. Of course, we see that quite commonly, for instance, with children who are, experience different forms of abuse. It doesn't necessarily change the amount of love that they have for their family. And I would like to ask you to give us a sense of, thinking about your kind of earliest memories and help us understand what it was like growing up inside the Westboro Baptist Church in terms of your family life and more broadly within the church.
I think it's best to think about it. It's almost like a parallel reality. There are kind of two sides to my upbringing. There is the side, some of my earliest memories are, of course, my parents. They're incredibly loving, like physically affectionate. We read books and we played video games, and we, had this common backyard with a bunch of my cousins that we had this little swimming pool back there. So this totally normal in many ways childhood. But then there was a flip side of that, which, at age 5, we started, for me, we started protesting this local park. And very quickly, the targets of my church, which is almost entirely made up of my extended family, the targets of the church started to expand such that everybody outside of our church was seen as a danger to us, people who were hell-bound, and that we needed to maintain a certain, emotional distance from, and that we needed to go and preach to, that it was an expression of love for us to go and warn other people of the consequences of their sins. And so that became my life. Our entire life revolved around going out and protesting people outside the church. And it was something that we, an activity that we engaged in every single day in Topeka, Kansas. But we also would travel around the country, sometimes, 4 to 6 groups, being, protesting in different places around the country, every week. So it was our life. And learning and memorizing Westboro's doctrines, memorizing the Bible verses that supported those positions, being put in a position from the age of 5 to have to defend those ideas meant that I had to be really aware. I had to understand them. I had to be ready to give an answer to every person who walked by our picket line, who came and asked questions. I had to be able to articulate those doctrines. And so it was something that I lived and breathed.
Young children often ask some pretty interesting questions, and that's true for older children as well. As you get older, and you start maybe challenging some aspects of what you've previously learned. As a child, how would you describe? I mean, do you remember any moments of kind of wondering, like, what's going on here, or was it just so ingrained that it was just kind of accepted from the beginning?
I mean, a little bit of both, because absolutely there were moments. I was and am a very curious person. It's just that, and this is, one misconception about the church, and groups like it. The assumption is that they must just be, kind of country bumpkins or rednecks or something, uneducated. And that is not true of my family at all. My mom is one of 13 children. 11 of the 13 went to law school. Many of the other adults in the church have advanced degrees, and almost everybody has a college degree. They're very well educated. They're very analytical. And so anytime I went to my mother or one of the other older people in the church to ask my questions and to express, maybe a little bit of doubt about, whether or not these things were true, they always had an answer. There was always an articulable answer that made perfect sense. And, it's such that, there were basically two foundational truths at Westboro. And the first was that the Bible is the literal, infallible word of God. And the second was that Westboro Baptist Church had the only legitimate interpretation of it. And once you accept those two things, everything else just falls into place. It took a lot. It took a lot to be able to think outside of that paradigm, because I had accepted those two foundational truths from such a young age.
And can you talk a little bit about your grandfather, who was the patriarch, right, and essentially founded the church, Fred Phelps?
Yes.
If I understand correctly, he had been quite involved in the civil rights movement. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of history and what led him to kind of ultimately found Westboro?
Yeah, so he actually came to Topeka, Kansas. He said that he arrived in the city the day that the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka decision came down from the U.S. Supreme Court, and he took that at that point he was a young traveling preacher, and he took that as a sign from God that he should go to law school and effectuate civil rights in this Jim Crow town. That's what he called Topeka. And so that's what he did. He went to law school. And then, as I mentioned, he required his children also to go to law school and their spouses to go to law school, to join him in that civil rights work. And some people, look at the work that, obviously the ministry that he had later, this, anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, anti-everyone ministry, and it seems like a contradiction to people. Like, why would you be fighting for the rights of Black people and women and the elderly and people who are disabled? Why would you do that and then fight against this other marginalized group? And for my grandfather, there was absolutely there was no tension between those values, because both were derived from his understanding of the Bible. So, the verses that he would quote about equal rights for Blacks and others, he would quote these two passages. Says, "One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and to the stranger that sojourns among you, because God has made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on the earth." So the same God who said that it was, it was wrong to discriminate against people under the law, said that it was an abomination to be gay. And so for him, that was, and it was something that I didn't realize until I was, writing my book. I was looking at the timeline and realized that right at the point where he gave up his license to practice law, the event that sparked, the protesting ministry came just on the heels of that, and just within a couple of months. So it was as if, the end of this crusade that most people would have, would recognize as good and honorable and valuable in the history of this country, led right into this other that has caused so much pain for so many people.
Yes. So I'd like to move a little bit into how when we first met, which I believe was at an FBI meeting back in 2010, and that's a whole story in and of itself. But then we met again about a year later in the spring of 2011. You and your mother and I believe one or two of your siblings came to one of my classes, a class of PhD students, and gave a guest lecture. And then a year later, in spring of 2012, another class of PhD students, we traveled down and visited Westboro for the weekend. And, one of the things, and of course, I brought the class for the purpose of trying to give them experience in terms of being able to spend time with and interview and just interact with individuals involved in an extremist group and try and figure out how do you manage that situation and how do you manage yourself. But, I remember meeting you very vividly. And maybe this is retrospective on my, but I remember, feeling like you were very sincere. You seemed very genuine and caring, but also expressing, quite a bit of hatred. So this, really hard to kind of reconcile that, from my vantage point. But also I felt like that you were reachable, and it's hard to put into words exactly why I perceived it that way. So when I found out that you disengaged, I wasn't super surprised. But at that point in time, from your looking back around the 2010 to 2012, I mean, were you having doubts, or if not, when did you start having doubts?
I think when we met, I was not having doubts. You were right. I was very sincere about my belief in the church and the doctrines. I was extremely passionate, very zealous. I had taken the church's message to Twitter, and Facebook to a lesser extent, but Twitter was primarily my method of engagement. So I would say now, and I would have said to you then, no, I'm not having doubts. And yet, it was 2009 that I got on Twitter, and they weren't conscious. Any misgivings that I, eventually came to have about Westboro, and those, actual conscious questions and doubts, they were all subconscious at that point. And what I mean is, Twitter, it happened so fast. I got on Twitter with the express purpose of spreading Westboro's message. And I was, the way that we talked about outsiders is, this should be a one-way conversation. We have nothing to learn from these people. Like literally we would say things like that. And yet when I got on Twitter and was preaching those, the church's doctrines, there was a lot of, hatefulness reflected back at me by people who were extremely provoked by what I was saying, and, completely understandably so. And yet there was also almost immediately these individuals who would respond and recognize that I was a human being, and they really wanted to try to understand where I was coming from. And so those conversations start being about doctrine, but also you get to know people as human beings. One of the things that was so remarkable about Twitter, that distinguished it from all the interactions I'd been having with people for decades at that point on the picket line, was that Twitter allowed me to develop rapport with people so that they knew that I was coming from a genuine, sincere place, that I really believed that I was doing the right thing. And I think that gave some individuals hope, right? Because if somebody's intentions are good, even if their actions are bad, well, then there's something reachable about that person, right? If they were intending to do harm, there really isn't anything to work with. And so, yeah, I would say that at the time that we met, Twitter was starting to become this alternative source of community for me, which had never been the case before in my life. Anytime I was in physical space with other people, I knew to keep them at arm's length. And Twitter just broke down those barriers so fully so that I could see parts of people's lives that I never really experienced in real life.
So you mentioned that it happened really quickly. Can you give us a sense of when would you say, that, so you got on Twitter in 2009 and pretty much immediately started having these kind of conversations, and some of those included people essentially recognizing your humanity?
Yeah. So I would say one of the first people that I attacked on Twitter was this man named David Abitbol. So he ran a blog called Jewlicious. And he was, is an Orthodox Jew living in Jerusalem. And, at his very first response, again, it was exactly the kind of hostile ad hominem attack that was the kind that I had been expecting. But again, very quickly, you can look back, and I actually have done this because I didn't delete any of my old tweets, and find these exchanges between us that start out like that extreme hostility. And then we start kind of joking with each other, kind of, the insults were gone, and the sense of, hostility and malice were gone. We still clearly didn't agree, but we were joking about, memes and videos on YouTube and stuff. So when we met, that was where I was. And then it wasn't until it was November of 2010, David actually was the very first person who ended up finding an internal inconsistency in Westboro's doctrine, a contradiction. And coming from a family of lawyers who claimed a monopoly on truth, for him to find this, it seems like a relatively small, relatively insignificant contradiction. But when you claim to have the truth, the unquestionable divine truth, it rocked my world. It became this thread that sort of unraveled the rest of the doctrines as well. Because if we could be wrong about this, the question eventually became, what else are we wrong about?
What was the inconsistency?
It had to do with the sign that we held calling for the death penalty for gay people. And he essentially made two arguments. The first was, saying, didn't Jesus say, let he who is without sin cast the first stone? Which, we had an answer for that. And it was, yes, but we're not casting stones. We're preaching words. He pointed out the obvious, problem there, which is, yes, but you're advocating that the government cast stones. And that's what Jesus is talking about in that passage. And that kind of rocked me. And then he kind of went on to point out that there were people in my church, including my own mother, who had committed sins that were worthy of death, according to the Old Testament. And so why weren't we calling for the deaths of those people as well? And so, again, it might seem like it was one sign out of, hundreds at that point. And like I said, it completely shifted ultimately how I saw the world.
And he pointed out that inconsistency in 2010. And then how long was it before, when did you actually leave? And what happened in that interim period? Yeah,
it was 2 years, almost exactly, from the day that he made that contradiction. Mm-hmm. And I would say what happened was I did what human beings instinctively do when you encounter the kind of cognitive dissonance. So I thought, okay, well, I don't believe that sign anymore. I can't hold that sign anymore because I can't defend it. But nobody else in the church recognizes this contradiction. So when I went to my mother and other older people in the church to point this out, I was just immediately shut down. So of course, the question at that point is, do I leave everything that I know is true? And the only people that I've ever allowed to, who have been my community my entire life, do I leave all of this because of one small inconsistency, or do I? Yeah, and I would say it wasn't even as conscious a decision as that. It was just, oh my God, this is wrong. I have to shove this over into the corner of my mind and not think about it. But then again, just the fact of it being in my mind, it made it so that when other questions came up later, I was, for the first time in my life, willing to ask the question, to challenge it, to not just think, oh, I'm just not spiritual enough to understand this. I just have to trust the judgment of these older, the elders in the church.
And so was there an actual day where you packed up some boxes and said, I'm out?
Yeah, I had been having conversations for a few months with a sister of mine who had been the only person who, when I expressed these questions and doubts, instead of shutting me down, she would say, yeah, that doesn't make sense. So we kind of went back and forth over the course of a few months, trying to, it was like boomeranging, right? Because there's one side of my brain that thinks, oh my God, this is wrong. We have to leave immediately. And then the other side thinking, oh my God, it's a test from God, and Satan is whispering in my ear and I'm failing the test. And so you are questioning your whole sense of reality, your whole, understanding of how the world works. And it was absolutely overwhelming. But there did come a day when, it just wasn't possible to continue walking this line between, knowing that certain things that we were doing were wrong. I had questions about a lot of things, but there were things that I absolutely believed were wrong. Protesting funerals was wrong. Praying for people to die was wrong. And I couldn't keep supporting that in any way, not just not doing them myself, but being part of this community where that is happening frequently, constantly. And so we packed up. My dad dropped us off at a hotel, and it was as devastating as you can imagine.
And it was you and one of your sisters you left together.
Yeah.
And prior to that day, did your parents have any idea that you were, kind of struggling with these issues?
Yes. So at first it was very like, again, it's the kind of community, because it's so tight knit. There's so many wonderful things about that. But one of the things is that you have this sense that everybody can read your mind, right? Because they're also led by God. And so it was all just happening in my mind at first. And then as time went on, I became more and more vocal about, because you recognize, like, if I'm going to leave and lose everyone, I need to try to convince them while I'm here. I need to try to, maybe they can be persuaded. I was persuaded. Maybe they can be too. I believed then, and I still believe now, that they can be reached. But it was really important. I couldn't keep supporting it anymore. So that they did know, but I don't think they understood quite to the extent until we actually started packing.
And then after you left, what's happened in terms of your relationship with your parents and others in the church?
So when you leave, you are completely cut off. They believe, and it's not a punitive thing. They believe that it's for our good, right? That God requires them to deliver us to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that our souls may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. So they believe it's for our good and for their good. They believe that we are a danger to them, a spiritual danger to them. And so, at the very beginning, for the first couple of months, my sister and I were following all the rules and not reaching out to them. But again, it became apparent very quickly that if we just follow those rules, nothing changes. And I know that ex-Westboro members the hostility and the mental barriers are greater for ex-members than it is even for, members of the LGBTQ community or Jewish people or any other targets of the church. We are the most despised, if you will. And yet I do believe they are persuadable. And it's been amazing to me over the past several years. I've been making these arguments in interviews and in public, on Twitter, in private letters to them, trying to help them see outside of that paradigm. And at first, the reaction has always been for them to double down on whatever the doctrine or question or doubt is. But it's been amazing to me to see that, and sometimes it takes years before they will change or make a move on some of these things. But for instance, when I saw them publicly disavowing these signs that I'd been arguing against for years, it just is more confirmation for me that they can be reached, and that if you look at Westboro's signs now, there is a marked difference between, there are still, of course, the hateful signs, but then there are also things like be reconciled to God and Christ our hope, things like that, things that, any mainstream Christian church would agree with. And to see that move is just amazing to me, because it would never have happened when I was there.
And it sounds like, you're still very much committed to trying to help, other members of your family and other members of Westboro experience the kind of transformation that you've been able to. And that takes a lot of commitment on your part, and the courage that it took for you to leave. And, the role that social media played, I think is such an important part in terms of your transformation. And so with that being said, I think that gives us a good opportunity to kind of turn towards a broader conversation of social media and online extremism. And to do that, I want to introduce another part of our conversation and a guest here, Dr. Megan Squire. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Megan. She's a professor of computer science at Elon University. She's authored 2 books on data analytics and data mining, and over 40 articles. She received the 2017 Elon University Distinguished Scholar Award. Her research on using data analytics to understand online extremism has been featured in Rolling Stone, CNN, and to be frank, far too many other media outlets to name here. She was recently featured on PBS Frontline special about the January 6th insurrection. She regularly consults with the Southern Poverty Law Center and supports their efforts to monitor extremism. And she's been a great resource for myself, being able to reach out to her on a number of occasions and take advantage of her expertise. So it's a real pleasure, Megan, to bring you into the conversation here.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you ended up focusing on this particular topic from, with your computer science background?
Yeah, so I used to study how other niche communities operated online. I wasn't particularly focused on extremism, but rather studied software developers in certain subgroups and communities and how they worked and operated. And I began probably in the mid-20 teens, I started noticing a lot of toxicity in their behaviors. And that interested me a lot more than how efficient they were at, writing code. So I slowly started changing my research focus to understanding their online behaviors and their sort of subgroups and niche communities. Around the time of the last election, the 2016 election, I shifted a little bit further to studying what we called then the alt-right and the rise of that, particularly within the tech communities. And then ultimately shifted to a completely an online extremism research focus. So now that's pretty much all I study. So it was a slow but gradual shift.
And can you tell us, just following up on that, can you tell us a little bit about, in terms of far right extremism, white supremacist extremism, some of the different, they use lots of different types of digital technology. I mean, what would you say are some of the major kind of trends most recently in terms of what you're seeing in terms of their use of digital technology?
Yeah, so right now we're in a phase where a lot of people are aware of this behavior online and are wondering what to do about it. It's been, finally recognized as a cause of problems. And so this is happening both at the individual level. Folks are, looking around them and seeing other people engaging in this behavior, sometimes in their own families or communities. It's also happening at the corporate level. So companies are realizing that this is happening on their platforms. So we're getting a little bit of awareness, which is good. The natural outgrowth of that, though, is that now some of this behavior is being removed from the platform. So folks are getting removed, accounts are being removed, whole movements sometimes are getting removed from platforms and other places where they can, advertise, recruit, whatever. That's causing interesting changes in the stuff that I study. So primarily I do collect data about these phenomena on social media. When they get removed from social media, folks move around. So I'm noticing a lot of movement of these groups on different platforms. So moving from larger, let's say mainstream, big tech, if you want to call it, platforms to smaller ones, more niche, more, exotic platforms that most folks would not be familiar with at all. So that's a challenge in data collection, but it's also an interesting one. It provides some opportunities to get data sometimes a little more readily than we might have before. Sometimes this is called the move to alt tech. We've heard that phrase a little bit used. So that's something that I'm definitely keen on studying and have been for several years. Another aspect that I've been studying recently is the changes and evolving of financial models that these groups use to sustain themselves. So delving really deeply into how these groups are being funded, how they're self-funding, how are they able to maintain afloat, how are they able to get funds, and what do they use those on? So that's taken up probably the majority of my time, to be quite honest, the last year or so. And looking forward to the next year, I'm also going to be studying a lot of financing questions. So
great, thanks, Megan. Yeah. And I want to turn to Megan Phelps Roper now and bring her back into the conversation. And Megan Phelps Roper, I seem to recall, and I think you mentioned this earlier about Facebook. You said you used Twitter, that was something you gravitated towards. But I remember, for instance, Westboro doing parodies of songs like Lady Gaga's Poker Face and posting that. Was that on YouTube and Facebook? Is that right?
Yeah, YouTube, Facebook. There were all these, little things that you could, post on Twitter at the time that are not available anymore. But yeah, we used parodies and pop culture a lot, right? In anything, memes, right? It's how can you convey this message in a way that people will hear it? Not that they will listen to it, but that will get their attention. And so, yeah, I in spite of myself, there are things that we did back then that I still think, wow, that was actually pretty, I mean, from a marketing perspective, pretty ingenious.
Yeah, and some of that involved actual singing, right? There were performances. And was the idea just any attention is good attention? Is that the principle?
Absolutely. And some people would see that, like they would see that as if our message was insincere, right? Because we were taking like we only wanted the attention for ourselves, for instance. But, I remember sitting in on an interview where a reporter asked my grandfather, some people say that you're just doing this for attention. And he looked at her like she was stupid and said, well, of course I'm doing it to get their attention. How can I preach to these people if I don't have their attention? And that was it. It was, and he would say things like, this world needs our message more than it needs air to breathe, water to drink, or food to eat. And we really believed that. And so literally any method of getting that message out was acceptable as long as it was consistent with what we actually believed.
And was there a sense internally that these were effective mediums, and were there efforts to try and kind of track any kind of effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely thought it was extremely effective. I remember, so I was the only one of us on Twitter for a while, and I remember trying to explain retweets and, other ways of explaining to people just how big it was, for instance, to be the #1 worldwide trending topic on Twitter, which was I think it was like the first couple of weeks I got on. Adam Lambert, we protested an American Idol concert in Kansas City, and Adam Lambert tweeted #GodHatesHate. And so this whole, it was extremely effective is what I'm trying to say. And it was almost like a symbiotic relationship between Westboro and the media, because, obviously we needed them to get our message out, and we helped them, generate clicks and, people reading their stories and watching their videos. And I'm really glad to say that has dissipated somewhat. I think people the newness of it has somewhat worn off. And as I mentioned, Westboro's tactics have gotten much less aggressive and provocative since my grandfather passed away in 2014. But yeah, I mean, it was extremely effective. And I have 2 uncles actually who spent every single day, they would send out dozens of articles that had been published about Westboro in the previous 24 hours. It was a constant stream of media.
Okay. So, and, I want to turn to Megan Squire on this first, and then come back to you, Megan Phillips Roper. But in terms of we think about responses, so, I think we all know there's no argument that there's a lot of this type of toxic material online. The question is how do we respond? And one of the I guess strategies that's received quite a bit of attention is this idea of deplatforming. And Megan Squire, you talked a little bit about that. If we could have you kind of discuss briefly what that strategy is, and then your sense of its degree of effectiveness.
Yeah, so right now, social media companies basically can set the rules for how they want conversations to unfold on their platform, what they feel like relationships are about on their platform. And most of them have some kind of statements about, no criminal behavior, no harassing behavior, that kind of thing. Some of them expand that a little bit more to talk about hate speech, and even particular types of movements have been banned from certain social media platforms. So last summer, rather infamously, the Boogaloo movement was banned, and later QAnon was banned from a few of the platforms. So the idea is that they set the rules, and if you want to play on their platform or their website, whatever it is, their apps, then you have to abide by those rules. So when folks don't do that, they are removed from the platform. Usually there's other measures taken first. So they might be quieted, they might be given a timeout, they might have their ad revenues taken away if it's YouTube, or their ability to use certain features on the site and that kind of thing. But ultimately they can be removed from a platform if their behavior is bad enough. And so that at that point, they'll have a choice of either coming back and trying to be, under a new name maybe, and try to be more following the rules the second time, or they'll go to another place that's more friendly to them, or will give them a second chance, or a third, or a 10th chance in some cases. So the idea there is that you set a standard, and then you watch for the person to not meet that standard, and at which point you take action. Some platforms have moved to also banning or I guess taking action based on off-platform behavior. So this is a little bit controversial, but it's an interesting case. So someone is so infamous off-platform that regardless of how well they toe the line on the platform, you still don't want them there. So that's a little bit interesting. Yeah, so it comes down to the relationship between the platform itself and then the whole set of users, including the occasionally problematic ones, and then just how that all shakes out. So
one of the critiques you hear about this deplatforming effort is that it's essentially kind of akin to called crime displacement in criminology, is you're just moving the problem, and actually some people say you're moving it to more secretive places where more damage can be done. I'm just curious to get your response to that criticism for this strategy.
I think it has some truth to it. They do move usually when they're removed from one platform, they do attempt to go to another one. Sometimes if an entire movement or a big group is removed from a platform, though, they do lose membership. There is a lot of attrition when they do move to the next platform. They don't always choose one that's quote unquote, harder to track them on or dark, more clandestine, whatever. Sometimes they do, but not always. And then what I've found in my personal work is the guys that I'm following are usually pretty, they're pretty far gone. And the platforms that they choose to go to are often easier to get the data from in some cases. They're usually built on distributed technologies. Sometimes they have encryption on some deep down parts of the platform, but oftentimes they don't. And so I've actually found, especially in the financial world, I found it much easier to get the data from them on Bitcoin or on DLive than on, PayPal or using credit cards. So it really depends, I think.
Okay, thanks. And Megan Phelps Roper, I mean, you've consulted with social media companies, right? And given your kind of advice and expertise on the issue. I mean, how do you respond when they ask you about this issue? And obviously your personal story is kind of interesting to think about deplatforming in relationship to that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand the instinct to push people off of these platforms. I remember having a conversation with Del Harvey, who is the head of trust and safety at Twitter. And she, the first time I met her, she was pulling up these email exchanges she was having with Jack Dorsey and the other Twitter execs who were asking, why aren't we kicking these people off of our platform? And the answer was their Twitter terms of service that were different at that point. But also, I wasn't threatening people, right? I wasn't breaking the law. I wasn't doxing people. I was just saying things that they didn't like. And I think, drawing the line at criminality, like where people are actually causing physical harm to people in the real world, it does make sense to draw the line in the sand there and say, no, we're not going to let our platforms be used for those kind of nefarious purposes. But I also think that when you have, people who are in these kind of, ideologically isolated communities, pushing them away from mainstream, sites like Twitter and Facebook, where they, where they're just, as you say, like kind of push deeper into their own communities, no longer exposed to the, kind of people and ideas that might challenge those the things that they believe. I think that it's kind of the opposite of what we should be doing. When I started looking at the way that people are radicalized on the internet, on places like Twitter, it's kind of the reverse process of what happened to me in my de-radicalization. It was people, inviting you into their communities, and for radicalization, you're being invited into these extremist communities. I had people inviting me into the mainstream, people saying like, well, I understand where you're coming from. I see where you've derived these beliefs, but have you considered this, showing me that they genuinely cared about me. And I think that combination of kind of inviting me to be part of the community rather than trying to expel me from it, that made an enormous impact on my life. I mean, I know you mentioned Derek, you were talking about Derek Black earlier, who, former white nationalist who, seen as the future of the movement, who, ultimately left that and has become an advocate on the other side. He said something to me once. He said, change your community, change your mind. And I absolutely, that resonates with me, because it wasn't until I was really part of another community and could understand their values and to be persuaded by them. That I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Megan Phelps Roper. That gives us a lot of, I think, some reason for hope there in terms of that potential for change. And Megan Squire, I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I mean, what are your thoughts as far as kind of potential to harness social media or strategies to harness some more positive dimensions of social media to counter violent extremism that we've been talking about here?
Yeah, I think there's potential. I think the data shows right now that there's a lot more people being sort of sucked into the pipeline going the one direction than out, unfortunately. But we shouldn't ignore the cases where, folks do hear positive speech and there are positive outcomes from that. So I think there's hope there. I don't think that we're quite there yet. I would always make I eternally want more research into everything. So I'm going to always ask for that. And be open to what the data is showing us. Right now, there is an enormous amount of online harassment taking place. A lot of these groups use that for fun and games. Just because it doesn't result in real world, physical harm doesn't mean it's not harm. So if the last thing you do is at night is, turn off your phone and the first thing you do in the morning is pick it up, we are online, and that's the reality for most of us. So just being aware of that, being aware of the impact of the online radicalization that is real. It's a real phenomenon, and then really looking for ways where we can pull the best parts out of what we know is good about social media, right? And then trying very, very hard to stop the negative parts. So I've heard a few uplifting lines of research. There's a few things that have been funded that look promising. Some of it having to do with counter speech, some of it having to do with one-on-one interventions. I mean, that's enormously time consuming, as I'm sure you know, having to, the labor that goes into something like that. But that probably is something that we should fund at least equally to the folks like myself who just research, recognizing the problem. We should also at least equally fund positive ways to stop the problem too. So.
Well, I just want to thank both of you for taking the time to talk with us today and offer your insight and expertise on such an important topic. And it's very much appreciated, and wish you the best, both of you.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks so much, Pete.
Thank you, Dr. Pete Simi, Ms. Phelps Roper, and Dr. Squire for your profound and informative remarks. We are so grateful to each of you for sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. While extremism is certainly unsettling and even frightening, I know I'm asking, in today's turbulent times, how can we all be brave enough to see the light and brave enough to be the light? Our next two speakers are from an organization called Braver Angels, who will tell us how their organization is bravely lighting the way to unite Americans and how you can get involved too.
All right, sadly this week we saw politicians acting like preschoolers again. A meeting that was supposed to be about Syria turned into another instance of name-calling and finger-pointing, and what's worse, this behavior is being mirrored by regular people all across the country. Liberals and conservatives can't talk to each other anymore. It's tearing up friendships and families. I recently found, though, a group that's trying to heal this division. It's called Better Angels, and since 2016, they've been hosting workshops all over the country, bringing folks together to find common ground.
Politics has always been a passionate subject, and we've always had deep political disagreements. That's the way it's supposed to be. But we've gotten to the point where people can't even talk to one another. Americans no longer see their political opponents as simply wrong or misguided. They see them as bad people whose ways of thinking are dangerous and incomprehensible. They see them as enemies. This level of rancor and mistrust threatens our democracy, and it makes it harder for us to move forward as a nation, regardless of who the president is.
The fact that we live in what feels like, some people call it, a cold civil war, that takes a toll on all of us.
But it also is an extraordinary opportunity because this deeper project of civic renewal, of healing the relationships that exist between the American people across the cultural and political divides, that's something that can only be achieved through what we call patriotic empathy, this idea that your love for your country is demonstrated in your love for your fellow American. As Braver Angels, we're able to lean into that with courage and boldness.
It will make you feel like we can serve this place and our country can serve humanity in a way that is actually beautiful. and actually does us justice.
This is not a left-wing movement, this is not a right-wing movement, but it is indeed an American movement. We still have it in us to be champions for what is right and what is graceful and what is decent here in the United States.
I'm Mary Thomas Valens. I went to my first Braver Angel event thinking I was an open-minded, non-judgmental Democrat. And then I met Barbara there, who leans red. During a powerful stereotypes exercise, my mind was blown at all the faulty assumptions I held about people like Barbara and the other side. Throughout the workshop, I discovered how much common ground we shared and what we wanted for our country. The Braver Angels conversations and activities from people all across the political divide have been life-changing for me. And now we are both highly active volunteers working to depolarize America.
What attracts me to Braver Angels is the exchange of ideas. Mary knows all too well that I'm a big fan of quotes. And one that comes to mind when I think of Braver Angels is from Philip Fernbach, a cognitive scientist at the University of Colorado Boulder. He said our brains were not designed to think alone. When we surround ourselves with only those that agree with us, it is very much like thinking alone. Braver Angels provides an opportunity for a wide diversity of perspectives and opinions to come together to explore the very pressing issues facing our country. Although we're on opposite sides of the political aisle, I thoroughly enjoy working with Mary to host workshops, discussion groups, and action-oriented events for Braver Angels across the country. Braver Angels was originally named Better Angels. That name was inspired by Abraham Lincoln, who well understood that a house divided against itself cannot stand alone, and who called upon Americans to bring forth the better angels of their nature to heal the divide that was fracturing the nation at a time of civil war. Over the last several years, we again have found ourselves in a fractured nation, and as the 2020 election neared, we needed more than civility, empathy, and goodwill. We needed courage, the bravery to oppose those that wished to dominate their political adversaries, and instead to heal the divide and reimagine what it means to be an American. So we are now Braver Angels.
Do any of these questions apply to you? Do you assign mainly self-serving or negative motives to the other group and mainly positive motives to yours? Do you focus on the most extreme or outrageous ideas and people on the other side? And do you feel a rush of pleasure with friends when you ridicule those crazies that you see across the political divide? If you answered yes to any of these questions, Braver Angels and Wave invite you to a highly interactive Zoom event where you'll practice strategies for productive conversations that will be useful in most all tough conversations with politics and beyond.
Thank you, Barbara and Mary, for creating an opportunity for us to depolarize our community. You will have an opportunity to sign up in an email you will receive after this program. Thank you also to our Guiding Lights for their incredible service to our community, and to Dr. Seamy, Dr. Squire, and Ms. Phelps-Roper. This program could not be possible without the dedicated work of our fundraising chair, Bonnie Eastman, and our fearless program director, Rita Kahn. We are grateful for your leadership and vision in creating this impactful event that has not only raised a significant amount of money to support our work, but has also shown us how to be brave enough to be the light. Heartfelt thanks to our fundraising committee who have worked for months to plan and execute every detail of our event. Thank you again to our many corporate and individual sponsors. We appreciate your partnership. And don't worry, you still have time to make a contribution. If you'd like to join WAVE, please visit our website to learn more. All are welcome to join, including students. On behalf of WAVE Action Fund, thank you for sharing your evening with us tonight. We hope you are inspired to be the light and to help light the way for change.
Yo, I woke up this morning with a dream to change the world. Just wanna bring a smile to every boy and every girl. Can't do it by myself, on my own and all alone. The world is changing now, so let's all get in the zone. Every woman, every man, come and join me, lend a hand. It's time to step it up and lead our children to the promised land. The golden age of unity, of freedom and equality. Peace on earth is possible, just need a new mentality. Open up your heart and open up your mind. Open up your spirit and guess what you will find. Instead of us versus them, always focused on the enemy, you'll see that your enemy is just like you and me. The world is one country and mankind is citizens. Time to come together, y'all, all 7 billion. Turn war into peace, turn hate into love. Turn your frown into a smile, go give somebody a hug.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
Open up your hearts and mind and face reality. 'Cause there is some good within you, called peace and harmony.
Look inside yourself.
So see me as your brother.
See me as your brother.
Or your sister. I'll move your mountain and you move my mountain. 'Cause a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step.
Yeah.
Africa no says one hand can tie a boat. Let's unite and see the world change from good to best. And put a smile on the face of mankind as we say, I can and you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world. So do unto others as you'd have done to you. 'Cause change in the world starts with the golden rule. We gotta celebrate diversity and show love universally. 'Cause everyone on earth is part of one community. Black, white, red, tan, rich, poor, woman, man, atheist, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Baha'i, Buddhist, Sikh, or Hindu. What if you were judged for the language that you spoke? What kind of feelings do you think it would evoke to people down because of your race or face religious persecution? Time to rid the world of prejudice and start a revolution, talking no more hunger and no more pain, no more violence and no more slaves, no more hatred and no more greed, no more homeless or broken families, no more pollution, no more disease, no more corruption, no more poverty, no more discrimination. Kids need an education, gotta give hope to the up and coming generation. Look towards the future and forget about our sins. Take a moment to reflect, 'cause the power is within. Sing it, Awu.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
Every black man and every white man, we are connected as one.
One people, y'all.
Yeah. So take my hand.
Everybody now.
I'll take your hand.
Come together,
and
y'all.
the dream will come true.
Yeah.
We can all make a change.
Make a change.
One people, one world. Yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la. Ooh, ooh. Yeah. Yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la. So we say, I can and you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
I can, you can.
We can change the world.
Yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la. Ooh, ooh. Yeah. Yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah, la, la, yeah.
This song goes out to every single member of the human race. Each action you take has an impact on the rest of humanity. So make your life about something positive and do some good to make a change. The world needs you.